Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages. Welcome to the Equity.Guru Investor Roundtable. Speaking of children of all ages, I'm Rob. Down here with me in the basement is Galen. Hello, Galen. Up in the far corner is the guru himself, Chris Perry, who's feeling chipper. And straight up is, is Michelle Ventura, our chart attack master. We're talking about solar companies today. We did this, I don't know, a few months ago. And it's a fascinating sector because of the future of the world. Is that big enough? Is that strong enough terminology? Boralex, BLX on the Toronto Exchange, Northland Power, NPI on the Toronto, also NIE, which is Innergex Renewable Energy, and Canadian Solar, that is, Canadian Solar, CSIQ.
Canadian Soiler?
Yeah,
Canadian Solar.
It's Jason Kenney, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like my cousin Homer when he says nuclear.
It was early year Canucks.
Speaking of Canadian IQs, here's Galen to tell us all about it.
Oh, sure. Well, as Rob had mentioned earlier on, this is the burgeoning of a whole new world in regards to solar. They got the shit kicked out of them over the last, let's say, 10 years or so. When the reality trough hit, the expenses were high and the companies just weren't performing. But basically, 36 years of weather data has actually proven that we could supply about 80% of the world's power through solar energy, which is actually kind of a nice thing to come up with. Apparently, solar panels will retire about 30 years after their date of their installation. So that's a really long-tailed use now that never was in before. And also 55%, if you're not really aware of this right now, of the world's power is actually solar at the moment. And we're expecting that by 2050, the majority will be coming from renewables and solar energy. So this is a trend that is definitely in the happening right now. Now, the companies that we're talking about are, I've centered on three that were like utilities companies because this is an interesting aspect where it's not just the producer itself, it's a company that is involved in sort of facilitating the production, which offers dividends, which is actually kind of a nice thing for investors.
I think it's the best time to talk about them, especially with what's going on in the markets, or good old utilities.
Absolutely. So Boralex operates in four segments, which is wind, solar, hydroelectric, and thermal, but they also do storage. They have projects in Canada, France, the US, and the UK. They're one of these interesting companies are really applying for growth. They're putting 50 to 70% back in to their projects to just like of their revenue back into the system to try and increase the growth. And they're hoping to get investment grade credit rating fairly soon. This is where they're pushing. We've also got Northland Power. This is a Canadian company, operates in three segments of natural gas, wind, and solar. They've got projects in Canada through the eastern provinces and also Saskatchewan. They're operating in Colombia, Germany, and Mexico. They produced 5,929 gigawatt hours in Q1 to Q3 in 21. They also produce a monthly dividend of 10 cents a share. So that's actually kind of interesting. Also, Energex Energy. There you have three segments as well: hydroelectric, solar, and wind. They have a total of 79 sites producing 3,800 megawatts. They're in Canada, they're in the US, they're in France, and they're in Chile. Their production in Q3 of 2021 was 2,229,000 megawatt hours. They actually managed to create some revenue, but they did also manage to lose in the same process. The revenue was about 184,000 in Q3, but they also lost 23,000 in that same period. But they produce a quarterly dividend of 18 cents per share. Last company is not a utilities company, but an actual producer. They do have their hand in the production of solar power plants, however, and it's quite prolific. Canadian Solar has projects as a module supplier and also as a project developer. And get this, Australia, Nigeria, Germany, United Arab Emirates, Spain, South Korea, Poland, China, Japan, US, Mexico, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Italy, Slovenia, Turkey, India, Pakistan, Namibia, Uganda, Netherlands, Jordan, South Africa, Philippines, Vietnam, and then I stopped right in the list.
So
So
basically, any country with letters in its name.
pretty well. They've got a wide reach. They've produced, and this is, I guess, why, revenue of 1.23 billion US in Q3 2021. They also managed to have a net income positive of 35 million during that same period. They also managed to ship 3.9 gigawatts of solar modules. They also managed to, and this is their big thing as well, is solar storage or power storage projects. They have 2.9 gigawatt hours under construction with 21 gigawatt hours in their development pipeline. Interesting companies. You guys can take it from there.
Yeah, so this is definitely the pure solar play here, Canadian solar compared to
Yes.
everything else.
Very
I
much
was
so.
gonna say, my next goal is to work in Namibian solar energy, just so you know. And
You'll be a first mover.
there you go. But I dropped my pen right when you said the first thing about, did you say 80 or 90% of eventual solar? Is that what we're trying to get to?
Well, yeah, we're trying to get to that, but basically we're looking at about
Right now, 50,
80%.
you said 50, 55% now.
Yeah, 55% now, but the weather data indicates that we could actually pull in 80% of our power needs from,
80%.
America's electricity needs, I should say. Let's make that more specific. But that's solar energy along with wind.
Right. Guru, does this tickle your fancy?
I mean, from a personal standpoint, from an aspirational standpoint, I'm all for solar energy. I do look at these stock charts though and wonder why it is that companies that are doing so well in an industry that, you know, we would all say has a bright future, no pun intended, why the stocks are really ailing at the moment. And all in the same way.
I think this situation is a sector-wide disenfranchisement.
Yeah.
The reality trough hit, and people just stopped going there. The fact is that it is an eventuality, but there's a disconnect between their performance and what the investors think is there. I think that's me.
I would also think politically, in a lot of places around the world, where fossil fuel interests and fossil fuel money factors into the development process.
Galen, are we at a point where solar can handle baseload power?
Well, there's the one thing that detracts from the value proposition of these companies, and it's not them themselves, the actual technology that is indeed correct. It's too intermittent to provide baseload power. What we really need to sort of support this system is either natural gas-fired electricity generation or the breeder reactors that companies that, you know, the ones, for instance, headed by Bill Gates or supported by Bill Gates, the breeder reactors. We need a new nuclear energy production or generation. This is the stuff that actually produces with very little fissionable material. It reuses it until it's pretty well gone, and there's no heavy water being expended into the environment. This is the stuff that we need, but we've had years of legislation and lack of oversight and back padding and all that kind of shit going on, where the seawater-powered nuclear generation has been the thing. And unfortunately, it was always the inferior technology.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like for baseload power, obviously with solar and even wind, they have to be located in areas where it's sunny and where there's a lot of wind, obviously. And it ties in with agriculture because that's generally where a lot of the best agricultural land is, right? Where it's always really sunny and windy. So there's sort of this battle between, okay, are we going clean or should we support agriculture? But on the agriculture side, you know, you can always do vertical integrated and indoor farming. But I find it interesting that, you know, like the Saudis and, you know, those Middle Eastern countries where there's a lot of sun, they're going heavy, right, on the solar panels, solar cities, that's what they're calling them. Not Elon Musk's company, but
no,
they're
not
just
that failure.
They're just calling them solar cities. But I think the interesting thing is the way I like approach solar panels is I like the idea if you put them in your own house and you sell the extra power back to the grid to make some money. I think that's an interesting thing. And then if you're bullish on solar in general, I think if you maybe make them bigger or incorporate more, say, silver or copper, right? A lot of people talk about that, about baseload power and solar panels needing or requiring more metals. So I like to look at it in that way as a commodity guy, silver and copper, and I think a few other commodities there are what you could call green metals, I guess.
It's ultimately all about storage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is the
end,
problem,
it
right? It's not even really necessarily true that you need to be somewhere sunny to
Okay.
make solar work. The problem with solar is that you need to be able to store it, right? You can't just have electricity for half the day. In a best case scenario, you could do well with solar in Vancouver as long as you had batteries that could store the energy when it's being produced and then meet it out when it's needed. The vast majority of electricity draw is during the day.
Yeah.
Air conditioners and heaters and such tends to be a lot less when people are asleep. Solar doesn't really do much when you're asleep, but it does really well during the day. So, you can make it work. But if you're talking about like the entire base load of a
Right,
country, you can't on a cloudy day suddenly have no electricity. There needs to be much more advancement on the storage side. And I think that's probably where the money that would have been going to solar power is really being directed right now, right? It's being directed to resources that are useful in storage and technologies that are useful in storage. And to be honest, those technologies haven't really advanced at the same pace that the power generator technologies have.
No, you're very, very correct. And if you want to take Elon Musk as an example, they catch on fire and pull the energy off grid. So yeah, we do have a lot to go in regards to creating a safer and more stable storage capability.
Well,
I think what I'd really be looking at is companies that are steering towards individual power generation and storage rather than mass power generation and storage, right? If you've got a nice little 4-bedroom home and you've got some panels on the roof that can keep your hot water going, and you've got maybe some wind opportunities in the back of your backyard, and maybe even some geothermal to take care of your heating, there's a lot of opportunities there to generate power on an individual basis as needed and even more than needed, which I think people would be willing to go and spend a bit of money to set up.
Yep.
It's much harder to get a nuclear power plant done than it is to dig a geothermal power supply in your basement.
True, but the expenses, it is pretty expensive.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Microgeneration is a thing, and
There's an upfront cost, to be sure.
yeah, there is a definite upfront cost. But I mean, in the long run, yes, it does pay for itself. But you're looking at a 10, 15-year, possibly 20-year window before it starts kicking in. Now,
So when
that
Vancouver
doesn't
was
mean it
having
will
its
be forever. Like when technology gets better, more efficient at producing this energy, then the cost of the initial outlay is going to greatly decrease. And we're seeing that in solar panels and stuff. Like we've gone, I think, 90% or something, the reduction in costs on solar panels since their inception in or the 1970s. Like we've really managed to sort of bring up the mark. And I think if we continue to do so, geothermal power generation, as Chris was saying, with solar, wind, all that kind of stuff you could have on your property and be a micro generator, deal with your own electricity costs and needs, while at times of overproduction, you can sell your power back to the grid.
Yep. And I'm sure, like as we go in the, go towards the whole green environment stuff, I'm sure there'll be government subsidies and all that kind of stuff, just like they were, when you're buying an electric car. I'm sure there might be something like that if you go and build a solar panel. There probably already is. I think in Germany and Sweden, I know those two countries have a lot of that kind of
There's
stuff.
long been them in Australia. I think, if you think back to the 70s, during the time when a lot of places were heated by fuel, the government went out and gave a bunch of money to people to change the front of their houses to stucco instead of wood. There's long been a history of government getting behind things that are needed to take the load off. And I'm a bit surprised, really, that there's not much more happening on that front right now, other than the fact that as soon as Trudeau says, hey, we're going to give you solar subsidies, Alberta would jump up and down like they were Al-Qaeda.
Wexit.
My God.
There's a politics I was referring to earlier.
Yeah.
By the way, Galen, I mailed out the Musk fan club ID card and pom-poms. Did you get those yet?
No, I got those along with the flashy red hot pants. I really appreciate it. I'll be wearing them on my head.
Michelle, let's boogie through we get down to the nitty gritty here with actual stocks. So let's look at some some
Yeah, for
charts.
sure, for sure. Let's take a look at a lot of the charts. And Chris mentioned this earlier. Galen mentioned this earlier. Keep in mind, we've had a pretty crazy stock market volatility here in the past week. Today was a nice green day. I'm recording this on the 24th of January. It is a Monday. We're 2 days away from a Fed rate interest rate decision, and there's money, that's still spooked, right? Add in the geopolitical stuff too, and we're sort of seeing a situation where a lot of money is heading into bonds and cash for safety. So keep that in mind. But if you are bullish on these stocks for the long term, obviously it's a really good probably spot to jump in. I just want to start here with TAN, which is actually just in solar ETF. Just if you want to look at the solar market in general, a lot of the charts are going to look similar to this. With a nice downtrend, I guess. We were hitting a support level. Hopefully we were going to see a bounce there, but because of the overall market weakness, we saw a sell-off here. And, we have a green candle today with all the other stock market indices printing a nice green candle. And it's now just about climbing back over what used to be support, which is now resistance. And from there, we can see if we can build some sort of momentum and nullify the downtrend. But for now, we're still in a bearish trend, but that could change very quickly depending on what happens on Wednesday with the Fed and how the markets interpret it, and if all the geopolitical stuff sort of goes to the side. But I think it's interesting to look at the companies like Northland Power, Innergex and Boralex, because generally people like to run into what I like to call utility stocks. And I would include these three as utilities just because they do power generation, and essentially they're companies that, things can go wrong in the markets, but everyone's always going to be paying their energy bills and whatnot, and all these companies pay dividends. So generally it's seen as like a safety play. But even those stocks, we're seeing a bit of a sell-off, although they've held nice supports compared to what other markets are doing. So here's Northland for now. Major support here around the $35 zone. And while everything was selling off last week, the stock was actually, gaining some or creating a range here at support. And it's back to retest that today. So it is looking positive, but, Northland at a support level. If I draw a trend line here too, you can see that we're obviously still in that downtrend. But I think if that channel that trend line, is taken out, we have a new uptrend that we can work with. And I'll draw a bottom channel trend line here as well, because now you have your levels that you can play with until you get that breakout. So I am looking at Northland. I think this looks like a decent play at this support level. Obviously, I prefer just waiting for that breakout, because obviously maybe today could have been, as we talked about, dead cat bounces in the market. But I think, they pay a dividend of 10 cents here per share. And it is a utility. So I don't think it's going to sell off like, say a tech stock like a Tesla or like a Netflix or whatnot, right? Because it's generally consistent. The earnings are consistent because people are they're always paying their bills for energy. And that's why utility is seen as like a safe haven play. Innergex, we've talked about this last time, and I believe we were talking about it when it was ranging basically between these two levels here, between 22 and $19. Unfortunately, we broke below the $19 and we did drift a bit lower, pulled back to retest, and the sellers jumped back in. And just like Northland Power, we did base at a support level, while the rest of the markets were selling off in the past week. Intergex was actually gaining. It was actually green on those past few days there. So that's a good sign of, that's what you sort of want your utilities to do when money is running into safety. And as Galen mentioned, they pay 18 cents per share here in dividends. And then Boralex looks very similar. Once again, we were looking at this range when we talked about solar last time. Unfortunately, it broke below, and we're just waiting now to see if we can climb back above these resistance levels. So all these charts, Energex, Northland Power, and TAN, we're just waiting to see if we can actually climb back above that resistance level, or instead, are we just going to get rejected and continue lower if that happens? And I think what the overall markets do in general will be important, especially if it is Fed related. If it is safe haven or risk off related, I think the utilities will do a bit better, just because it's not money necessarily running into cash, but it'll be running into, I think, some sort of safety stocks like Boralex. And we talked about Buffett. Well, he didn't really jump into utility, I guess, sort of, because it is a natural gas producer, which I guess you can consider a utility as well, because people still use natural gas, and that's been his biggest play in the past 2 years now. So there's something to consider there. And then finally, the pure solar play here, Canadian solar. Major support here that I've actually drawn at around 2250, but very similar to the other charts where we did break down this support level up here around $32. We couldn't break back above to nullify that downtrend. And I think if you're a short seller, if you were shorting this is probably where you're going to take your profits, around this major support zone. If I scroll out, you can see how major this zone has been in the past. And now we're just waiting to see if markets in general will nullify the downtrend and create some sort of reversal here. But we're at support. But I would still just be a bit patient and wait for possibly until after Wednesday. But I think for a long-term investor, it's always safe to have some sort of utility play. And we talked about these three companies, Northland Power, Innergex, and Boralex. They're not just pure solar, but they have a hydroelectricity component, a natural gas component, some of them, and all three have a wind component as well, and a hydroelectricity component. So I think I favor those three compared to clean solar, just because of the dividends and them acting like a utility play. But if you are hardcore into solar panel, and Chris talked about the residential solar, which actually Canadian solar, they do have a residential solar component here as well. So if you're interested in pure solar play, then Canadian solar is the one to go. And it's funny, they're not listed in Canada though, just in the on the Nasdaq. So I don't know what's up with that.
That first sector chart you showed, that was American, right?
That was American, yeah. The ETF.
All right. So all that said, and where we stand at the moment, and it's dippity do. We'll start with Galen, and you got $7,500. Are you going anywhere with it?
Well, I am actually, but I'm spreading my stuff out a little bit, and I think I'm going heavy on Canadian solar because of its extensive solar panel portfolio. And as Chris had mentioned, they're also, he had mentioned that power generation or power storage was a major thing to be considering. Canadian solar is also heavy into that. They're going to be pushing much further, as I said, 25 gigawatts fairly soon. They're trying to get through their development pipeline. So I'm going to go 1,500 a piece for Northland, for Boralex, and for Innergex, just because they're nice, solid bets. And then I'm going to drop 3,000 on Canadian solar because I think with what it has going for the solar power itself, it's actually kind of a good bet for a company that's a pure play.
Mm-hmm.
You're spreading the whole kitty around.
I am.
We got to add the bell in future episodes when we spend all of our money. Chris Perry.
I'm keeping my powder dry right now. I think I'd be having an eye on Boralex. The action over the last few weeks has been pretty substantial on it. There's a lot of green days, a lot of pumped up volume. I think people are looking at this share price for that company specifically as being cheap. I noticed when looking at Innergex's news flow, there's a report from CIBC World Markets Analyst that says renewables performance remains decoupled from regulated utility stocks, and they've been pulled down by a rebasing of secular growth stocks while fund flows have gone against them. Translated, it's out of fashion. Solar's just not in fashion right now. There's opportunities to make bigger money quicker elsewhere. I would say that those that are interested in renewables have maybe pushed their focus towards uranium in the belief that we'll start moving on maybe some nuclear projects at some point soon. But I feel like there's probably some wind behind the backs of that sector. But right now, there's enough stuff that's dropping in the market that isn't solar based that I don't want to add to it by trying to catch a falling knife. I'd be looking at Innergex. I'd be looking at Boralex. And I think of those are the two that I'd be most interested in, just because there seems to be a little bit of pack support from traders. But I'm not going to jump in eagerly at this point. I want to see the companies show me something.
All right, Michelle, splitting the
Yeah, just
difference.
a disclosure. I am a shareholder of Innergex. I think we mentioned that in our past solar one as well. So I just want to mention that. So I would be a buyer of Innergex and Boralex. Those are my favorite two. I do consider them as the utility plays in my portfolio, right? Like they are safe in terms of consistent dividends, and I think people should have them in your portfolio. The way I would play is a bit different, though. I would maybe chip in a few $100s per month. That's generally what I do for my long term. I pick a few companies, dividend paying companies, put a few $100s in to buy shares every month. And I would do that with a company such as Innergex or Boralex as your utility play. I think it's important to have that. But if I was given the 7K, I would be splitting 3K each in Innergex and in Boralex. But as I said, you would want to add every month because it is technically your utility play. Yeah, you should have one in your portfolio, in my opinion.
All right, not too shabby. We just want to remind folks that they should do their own homework on all of this stuff. Check your sector charts, check your individual charts, check the whole thing, do your homework, do your research. Our fellas can tell you all sorts of kick-ass information, but we can't guarantee it. And also past performance does not guarantee future results. It is solar energy, and I will tell the folks the symbols again. Boralex, Toronto Exchange, BLX, Northland Power, Toronto Exchange, N as in Nancy, PI, Innergex Renewable Energy. I kind of dig them. That's an INE and on Toronto. And then in the, I think you said it's only NASDAQ.
Yeah.
And that is Canadian Solar, and that is CSIQ. There you have it. It's solar energy, and it's happening on the Equity Guru Investor Roundtable.